Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is February 22nd, 2016, and we are coming to you shortly after the Republican primary in South Carolina and the Democratic caucus in Nevada. Also coming to you on the eve of the Democratic primaries here in South Carolina. We're going to comment on that briefly. And we're going to get to a number of other things that I've been talking about, covering in the show for the last several months. Basically, our list of demands, a real program for the United States. It's a perfect time to discuss this because the elections are coming up. People are actually talking about policy, or at least semi-discussing policy amidst the clown show that are American elections. But we'll get into that tonight as well. But before we do, I want to remind you that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. And you can access the show's personal webpage at UCY.TV/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page, you'll find the archive of this show, the recent articles that I've done listed up there, links to them, and, of course, the YouTube videos and so forth on that page. And you can follow my work if you're interested in seeing it come out in real time. Of course, it's at activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, and eraofwisdom.org. If you're interested in my work specifically, that I would highly encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. That is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archive versions of my show. All of that stuff is there. All the relevant information, events, announcements, that sort of thing. All of that's there. There's links to the radio show, links to books. And the site has been improved greatly. So if you went there several months ago, you're going to see a noticeable difference now if you go there today. We've improved the way the site looks. We've added a lot of things that basically make the site a great hub for news and activism, and we are making improvements every day. So please keep checking back to brandonturbeville.com. Now, just a quick word on the elections. We have the GOP primary here in South Carolina on Saturday, and we saw Donald Trump winning big. Then we had Ted Cruz coming in second, Marco Rubio third, and, of course, Ben Carson and Jeb Bush getting basically 0%. Jeb Bush has now dropped out. He's gone. He's no longer a concern. He can go back to Florida where he really wanted to be. So he announced that just the other night. He's suspending his campaign, which means he's out. Ben Carson exhibiting the aloofness and bewilderment of the world about him, is not dropping out of the race. He got back on the campaign bus to go out and continue making speeches. But Donald Trump was the big winner. That's not a surprise. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz actually neck and neck for second place here. So that's something that's interesting. In Nevada, of course, that's the tragedy, was that the Wicked Witch of the West has won Nevada. Now, you'll look on the mainstream press reports, and it's going to say Hillary Clinton won big in Nevada. Well, Hillary Clinton won by 4 percentage points. That's not a landslide. That's not a mandate. That's not a big win. That's a win, solid win, but it's not a big one. And Bernie Sanders did better, I believe, than even his polling suggested. And that's despite Bernie's weakness and cowardice. So the people of Nevada didn't give her a big win, even in the caucus, which tends to produce better results for people who are more cunning and underhanded and aggressive, which the Hillary Clinton campaign tends to be. So that's some of that reason for that. Of course, you'll see the mainstream media saying that she has a big win because they're personally vested in seeing that this witch gets to the White House. Now that leads us to what's coming up on this Saturday, which is the South Carolina Democratic primaries. These are primaries, not caucuses, meaning that you go and vote. You don't stand in halls and join groups and all that kind of stuff. They're open primaries, which means that anybody who's registered to vote in the state of South Carolina can go to their polling precinct and vote in the Democratic primary. You do not have to register as a Democrat to do so. So that is a possibility for action if you're in the state of South Carolina. This is not, and I repeat, not an endorsement of Bernie the Bomber. We don't like Bernie. We don't like Bernie's pro-Israel, pro-war, socialism, and all that kind of stuff. We're not a fan of Bernie. But there comes a time when there's an opportunity to sabotage an open psychopath like Hillary Clinton, who exhibits all of the negative qualities of both the Republicans and the Democrats in one person, who exhibits all of the ideologies and the goals and desires of the American ruling elite, the international elite, the secret societies, the banks, the corporations, the establishment, whatever you want to call it. This woman exhibits the ideology of all of these people, and we never want to let an oligarch fight us on their own terms, right? We don't. If the oligarchs want Hillary Clinton, well, then we want to throw a stone in their pathway. Let's give them Bernie. Let's give them Bernie the Bomber. Not an endorsement of Bernie. We don't want Bernie to be president. We don't want Hillary to be president. We don't want Trump or Cruz or Rubio or Carson or any of these other stooges and tools to become president. But we have to realize that we have an opportunity to sabotage some of the Democratic primary electoral process, to sabotage the Democratic Party in some sense, and the Hillary Clinton campaign as well. So that's an opportunity. If you're registered to vote in the state of South Carolina, you've got the primaries coming up on Saturday. Feel free to go sabotage Hillary Clinton if you are able. So we encourage you to do that. This is not the general election. You are not endorsing anyone for president. You're not saying we want this person to be our president. You're not asking this person to marry you. You're just going in and trying to sabotage. Again, this is an open primary. You're going in to sabotage Hillary Clinton. Look at it that way. It's using all available techniques and all available ammunition to try to get our political agenda on the paper and get us on the scoreboard. Not a step forward doing this, but it's one way to fire back. Now, speaking of that, I have repeatedly said in the past that if you are going to have a political movement, if you are going to have a revolution, if you're going to have a protest movement of any sorts, whether it's very general, whether it's very specific, then you need a list of demands. You can't simply go out and protest and say, we don't like it, because the question is going to come back, well, what do you want to do about it? And if you don't have an answer to that, then your movement is doomed. Even if you succeed, it's doomed because you've got no program. You'll fail. So what we've got to do is to develop a list of demands. Not only do we not like the system as it stands, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to replace it. And that's what we have actually come up with here, and we're going to go over that on this show tonight. Now, hopefully anyone who was tuning in was not looking just for news, because news happens every week, and we're going to be here to cover it, especially as it pertains to Syria. Very important things taking place in Syria right now, but unfortunately, the middle of February, or toward the end of February, was a little later than we'd planned to release this discussion of a list of demands and see what we want. And as I said, this is a perfect time to do so, because this is a presidential election, and people are at least somewhat discussing issues, even if they're discussing them in the context of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and that kind of foolishness. This is an opportunity during the presidential election to get many of these ideas out there and at least on the table. But again, these are a list of demands for a revolution. This is for an actual political movement, an on-the-ground movement. This is what we want to see implemented to bring about a better world, and how it pertains at least to the United States domestically, and then we could, how we can implement these changes in the United States. Now, if you're listening in another country, these same demands are going to be very similar Most of them are going to be the same, but things can be tailored to your country as well, because the names will be different. Obviously, the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, that sort of thing. The names are going to be different, but the policies and the principle behind it are essentially the same thing. And before I get into it, I want to point out that there's a lot of rhetoric that goes back and forth, even in the alternative media, and sometimes especially in the alternative media, that presents a world which is essentially a zero-sum game, right? That we have to have a bunch of winners and everybody else has to be losers, that you can't have your cake and eat it too. Well, I'm here to tell you, we're going to talk about these policies, and if people are telling you you can't have your cake and eat it too, I don't know what the point of having cake is if you can't eat it. This is not true. You can have a system that works for everybody, that provides for everyone, but you don't have to have a totalitarian system that's bent and built on dependency and authoritarianism. You do not have to have government in your personal life. You do not have to have government governing over every aspect of life in order to have a regulated economy, in order to have a booming, effective economy where everyone has fair wages and higher living standards. We do not have to, it does not have to be this way, but this is the way it is because the domestic oligarchs, the international oligarchs, the establishment, should we say, or whatever you want to call them, are promoting this to us, because the goal is eventually a worldwide neo-feudal system that Carol Quigley wrote about, and that's what we're trying to avoid. We support higher living standards for everybody, not just in the United States, of course, but across the world, and the so-called developing world as well. We'll talk about that briefly, but again, just to be clear, if you're in another country listening to this show, the platform can be tailored to your country, and we encourage you to do that. So here's a number of things that I want to go over. We can't go into each one in depth because it would take up the whole show, but I want to get these lists of demands out there and this platform out there so people can begin to take these ideas and spread them around and actually start building a movement based on them. So we're going to have to discuss economics before anything else, because there's a lot of different aspects to these types of programs: the economics, the social policies, and of course a number of other things, civil liberties in that sense. But we're also going to get into, but we need to get into economics first, because unfortunately that's where most people pay attention, because when it hits their pocketbook is when they actually begin to pay attention to issues. And of course, it is also true that even with civil liberties, if you're poor, if you're in poverty, if you have no means of supporting yourself, if you're constantly struggling just to survive, what freedom do you have? You're not actually free in any real sense. So I have about 50 points here that I want to try to get to in the in this hour of this radio show, that I want to try to promote in terms of platform points that we want to use as legitimate demands for our movement here. Now, number one, I'll just go ahead and go through these things, and feel free to take notes. Right. Well, in terms of the economy, we are witnessing an unprecedented hemorrhage of jobs, of money, of living standards, of wages, of all of these things, right? And it's not stop. We need to stop this using these terms that are given to us like recession. The United States has been in a depression for a number of years, and it is still in a depression. There has been no recession. We have not reverted to an economic recovery. We are not exiting the recession. None of this stuff. There's no economic recovery. This is a depression where the numbers are constantly being finagled with and presenting us with false statistics. So when we talk about what we want to do, one of the things that we absolutely must do is end all bailouts of banks and financial institutions. The concept of too big to fail has to end, right? Any public money that has been given to private banks to maintain solvency has to be clawed back by a variety of available means. In other words, we have to stop the process of bailing out these financial institutions and these banks in order to stop the hemorrhage, right? But we also have to claw back a lot of this money. Banks that find themselves insolvent have to be seized by the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission for Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceedings. In other words, if these banks are bankrupt, they're insolvent, then seize those banks and triage the bank assets. Make sure you get these assets together, and if there's derivatives in the midst of these assets, then they have to be separated and eliminated during the process. So in other words, just if they have derivatives, get rid of them, right? Write them off. We're not going to allow payment for these. Now, number 2, in order to bring back the separation of banks and brokerage houses and insurance firms, we endorse and support the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act. This must be re-implemented. We also want to ban adjustable rate mortgages. We want to ban credit default swaps. These things are too dangerous to be allowed in the American economy. They are already detrimental to the lives of the average working men and women of the country because of what they've helped create. The regular listeners to this show are going to be familiar with this next one, the number 4. Enact the 1% Wall Street sales tax for revenue generation and to discourage dangerous forms of speculation. And this one is extremely important. And this is one that we can get mass traction on. Now, just for some specifics, the Wall Street sales tax needs to be applied at the rate of 1% to financial market transactions like stocks, bonds, flash trading, e-trading, high-frequency trading, debt instruments, and, of course, the notional value of derivatives. A reasonable exemption of $1 million per person per year should be enacted so we can prevent the placement of taxes on individuals who shift around personal financial assets or make investments for their 401k or other retirement account. But that is the exemption. Once you get above $1 million, you're getting in the realm of some type of speculation. The 1% tax needs to be paid by the seller of the instrument, not the buyer. And the proceeds accrued from the tax needs to be split evenly between the federal government and the states. The Wall Street sales tax at only 1% is estimated to bring anywhere from hundreds of billions to tens of trillions of dollars in terms of revenue. It's capable of funding the social safety net and the U.S. government as a whole, as well as effectively eliminating the budget deficit at the federal and state levels. All of this while discouraging dangerous forms of speculation and derivatives trading. Now, the revenue from this tax, as I said, should be split between the states and the federal government, and it should be used to fund Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, SNAP benefits, on-budget infrastructure spending, and eliminating the budget deficit of the states and the federal government. Now, in addition to that, granted that this the amount of speculation that's going to tend to go down once it starts getting taxed, but the revenue still is projected to be extremely high in regards to these in regards to the revenue here. Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare benefits need to be increased to reflect the current world situation. These cost of living adjustments, inflation, all of that stuff. It needs to be increased. We need to extend Medicare for all so that all Americans have access to health care. We could have a standard cost for the basic benefits of Medicare, the cost reductions for people who are working and for poor people, free to people in poverty, and of course, eliminate the mandate that is in Obamacare that forces individuals to buy private health insurance from private corporations, which is essentially a bailout for insurance companies. They've made billions of dollars now off of the backs of American citizens because they're forced to buy this stuff through law. But we want to see universal health care that's provided to all Americans with no mandate. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it. And it won't eliminate the private insurance industry. If somebody wants to buy private insurance, that industry is still there. But again, it's going to be given, offered at about maybe $100 per month, for Medicare benefits. But for people who are working, the lower your wages go, the lower the cost goes for that Medicare benefit as well. And if you're in poverty, it's free. We also need to increase unemployment insurance and SNAP benefits because we need to reflect the economic situation, the inflation that we've experienced, the cost of living, etc. People who are arguing that the SNAP benefits, for instance, are too high, these people are insane. You get about $2.22 per day or maybe per meal on SNAP benefits. Now you try to live off of that. We need to increase that. Now I'm not suggesting that we should have a culture of dependency here, of course, but the fact is when you're in a depression, people are going to go to bed hungry, and there's millions of people in this country that are going to go to bed hungry, and we have to have a program that makes sure they don't. Now, I'm not going to get off on a rant, but that's part of the demand here, to increase unemployment insurance and SNAP benefits to reflect the economic situation, to reflect inflation, to reflect the cost of living. We can use the Wall Street sales tax to provide free college education to students who excel in high school, and do that for the duration of the college career. Free college education to students who excel. Now that does not mean demographics-based recruiting. You don't get to go to college because of your skin color, but you do get to go to college because you excel in academic studies. That's part of the demand, and it can be paid for by the Wall Street sales tax. We want to increase personal exemptions and tax deductions for working individuals and working families. That is important. We want to require a 15% reserve for all over-the-counter derivatives. Number 7 here, we want to immediately stop all foreclosures on primary residences, stop all foreclosures on businesses, stop all foreclosures on farms. We want to do that for at least 5 years or for the duration of the financial crisis. And hopefully if these ideas are implemented, it certainly wouldn't go on for 5 years. But whatever comes first, for 5 years or for the duration of the financial crisis. If an individual can get a signed note from a judge stating that their inability to pay the mortgage to the bank was the result of economic hardship or illness or bank-based fraud, we want to make it where the bank cannot repossess. And in any event, the bank must produce the note in any case of repossession. Now, number 8, we want to set a 10% maximum interest rate on all credit cards and payday loans. These things are out of control. They need to be reined back in. Number 9, we want to bring sensible and reasonable regulation back to the commodities markets by requiring 100% margin requirements, 100% position limits, and also reasonable anti-speculation protections that are going to help prevent oil and gasoline spikes in price. Number 10, we want to restore individual Chapter 11. And number 11, probably one of the most important, we want to nationalize the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve should be seized by the United States government and placed under the U.S. Treasury. It should be renamed the National Bank of the United States. So from this point on, the size of the money supply, interest rates, lending types, all that stuff should be decided by laws debated and passed by the Congress and signed by the President. The U.S. government would no longer need to borrow from private banks or foreign countries. They could use the inherent credit-creating power of the Fed, the National Bank, to immediately begin lending for a variety of different purposes that involve physical production and tangible improvement in the living standards of the American people. This means that the money being used should be used in order to jumpstart an economic recovery, prepare a high-skilled labor force for a high-skilled future job market, create a culture of science drivers and human progress, essentially repair and revamp our agricultural system, and of course repair and redevelop the U.S. infrastructure. We want trillion-dollar tranches to be issued from the National Bank for the purpose of repairing national infrastructure like roads or rail, government buildings, and the like. These tranches should come in the form of 0% interest 100-year bonds. We will call them century bonds. Similar offers of credit need to be issued to refurbish these idle manufacturing and industrial centers, these infrastructure, industrial infrastructure and that sort of thing. 0% interest credit needs to be issued for the jumpstart of private businesses. That's right, both small businesses and big ones. Whether it's massive manufacturing operations down to the small mechanic shop and restaurants. We want to maintain commercial credit for retail stores, launch a campaign of hospital rebuilding. All jobs resulting from this money, by the way, must be union pay scale. And we do want a Buy American clause. That is important as well. Now, zero interest credit coming from the National Bank should be extended to fund Manhattan Project style scientific projects that are essentially designed to reach the level of progress and development that's going to see humans greatly increase their living standards and promote breakthroughs in health and science, promote space exploration, promote technology, all while doing that in an environmentally friendly manner. A Manhattan Project level attempt to attain free energy, nuclear radiation cleanup, healthy non-meat meat, and that is important, and other beneficial projects. All this stuff should be launched with this credit. We can also address the student loan issue with this credit as well. We want to refinance student loans through the new National Bank at extremely low or even no interest to relieve the student loan debt burden. That's what we want to do. Now, number 12, in terms of trade, we want a 15% protective tariff. We want to implement a 15% protective tariff on all goods that can't be reasonably produced in the United States, on all goods coming into the country. This is going to force domestic production, and if 15% isn't high enough to cause domestic production to increase, the tariff should be increased. And, of course, that relates to our trade agreements, which is number 13. We need to begin to renegotiate trade agreements like CAFTA, NAFTA, GATT, other bilateral trade agreements like the ones with China that are very lopsided when it comes to labor and trade practices. And, of course, we want to end membership and participation in the World Trade Organization. It's pointless. It doesn't do us any good. Get out of it. Number 14. We want to revive the Export-Import Bank. There's been a lot of propaganda surrounding the Export-Import Bank, and we are in support of the EXIM Bank's existence. We want to use the power of the EXIM Bank to encourage and promote American exports. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, number 15, we want to maintain publicly owned facilities like Amtrak and the United States Postal Service. These are assets for the U.S. government. They're assets for the American people, and they should be fully publicly owned, fully funded, and fully upgraded. That's part of our demands there. Number 16, we want to reaffirm the right to collectively bargain. Number 17, we do want to increase the minimum wage. Gradually, of course, with assistance or delays for smaller businesses at first, if that becomes a problem, if we determine that it is, but at a reasonable rate to eventually get to at least $15 an hour. Remember, if you took all the considerations in regards to inflation, in regards to prices being raised and that sort of thing, if you took all these things into consideration, essentially minimum wage would be about $22 an hour. So we're asking for 15. No person should work 40 hours a week and have a paycheck that does not allow them to support themselves. $15 an hour. If we have to do it gradually, we'll do it gradually. If we have to give assistance and delays for smaller businesses at first, we can do that if we need to. Number 18, we want to immediately cease support for terrorism in Syria, Libya, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Ukraine, all other places where the United States is organizing or training and supporting terrorism and death squads and terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. We want that immediately ended. It needs to cease. And number 19, we want to immediately cease all provocations in Ukraine, immediately cease all provocations in Syria. We want to open dialogue with the Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic, and express peaceful intent to Russia. We do not want World War III. We must begin a peaceful dialogue. So number 20, we want to see face-to-face meetings with the leaders of Russia, with the leaders of Iran, with the leader of Syria, to express a desire for peace in the region and potential cooperation and development. We want to declare the DPR and the LPR as a separate country. We want to allow Ukraine to function as an independent country, but one that stands neutral between the European Union and Russia. This will express the will of the Ukrainian people. It will also cool tensions down as well. Number 21. We want to immediately end all foreign wars and foreign occupations. Troops in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else, they need to be removed and brought back home immediately. Number 22, and this is domestic, right? Return to the true meaning of the Second Amendment. Gun laws must be abolished. Every American is free to own a gun without respect to what state or city in which you live. So we are arguing for the elimination of gun laws. If New York City says, well, this was what works for New York City where we ban handguns and long guns, too bad. You're in violation of the Constitution. You're going to have to get in line with it or face the consequences. Number 23, end illegal immigration. Now, we don't support a border fence. We don't want to become East Germany. We don't want to become the Iron Curtain. We don't need a border fence because a border fence actually it can be used to keep us in. But illegal immigrants, and it's not the fault of the individual people here, they do destroy social cohesion. They do destroy national identity, and they do destroy living standards and job opportunities and wages. So while we're not trying to blame the individuals, immigration should be controlled, right? And we want to shut these borders down in terms of the ability to cross illegally. We do not owe anyone the pleasure of coming in to the United States and setting up shop as they please. No country owes that to anyone else. So we want to see tighter controls at the border. Now, number 24, we want to see a repeal of any law requiring vaccinations for adults or children for any reason. Number 25. Now, this is kind of a two-part point, right? We want mandatory labeling of all genetically modified food in the interim period between a total ban. So we support mandatory labeling of GMO food, but ultimately what we support is a ban on GMO cultivation, except for controlled scientific purposes like plants, not animals. No genetic modification, no GM products should be allowed in the open environment or the human or animal food supply. We want a ban. Now, number 26, we want parity pricing for family and small farmers, right? Not for Monsanto, not for Dow. We want parity pricing for family and small farmers. In fact, we want to run Monsanto essentially out of business. Number 27, We want to enforce monopoly laws to ensure that major corporations do not create or maintain monopolies over any particular industry. Now, careful consideration has to be paid to the manner in which larger companies break up while maintaining their own monopolies. You can look at things like FedEx, for instance, and see that that's happening. But monopoly laws need to be enforced. Number 28. Remove property taxes on primary residences on individuals and families. Now, we're not suggesting removing property taxes completely, but on primary residences on individuals, and this applies to individuals, on primary residences, we do not want property tax. You should not have to pay rent to the federal government or the state government or the county to live in your home. We want to remove property taxes on a number of vehicles, for instance, one per person in the household. Beyond that, if you own 2 vehicles, you can pay property tax on the second. But if you have 4 people in the household, you get 4 vehicles tax-free. That's a necessity in 2016. Number 29, abandon all plans for carbon taxes or cap and trade. We need to engage in real environmental protections like cleaning up radiation and other forms of contamination, like controlling mercury spills, controlling oil spills, ending deforestation. These are the types of things that we need to be focusing on. And of course, number 30, we want to legalize and encourage the production of hemp. This goes right in hand with the environmental policy. Number 31, we want to create a culture of freedom within the United States. So this means we have to end this unnecessary permitting and licensing laws and policies like that. We want to end mandatory insurance laws. And that's not just for healthcare, by the way. That is for vehicles as well. Believe it or not, we had a time in this country where individual drivers were not forced to buy private insurance, and that, of course, was the starting point. Once they were able to force drivers to buy private insurance in order to drive on the highways, they were able to force average Americans to buy health insurance. So there is your slippery slope. We want to end CPS and DCFS programs that remove children from loving homes. This has to be brought under control. And number 32, of course, end the war on drugs. We want to punish criminals for crimes, not for substances. We need to legalize all forms of drugs for all purposes. This is including recreational. You want to put a drug in your body, that's your own choice. If it does damage to you, it's still your own choice. Now, to my libertarian friends who want to see government cut, I'm willing to cut something. I'm willing to cut the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. I don't want it to exist. It's pointless. I don't care if they have drugs. So there's no reason to have this. And we want to end the war on drugs. We want to end all of these ridiculous prohibitions, so let's cut the DEA. That's going to save a lot of money. We also want to cut the BATFE, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. We don't want drug laws, we don't want gun laws, we don't want tobacco laws, and we don't want alcohol laws. So let's get rid of the BATFE. Now, we do want to crack down on drugs being shipped into the United States illegally from outside of the country, particularly by foreign elements. We don't want another opium war. We cannot allow that. So we can crack down on that element. But if someone wants to produce whatever drug they see fit in the United States then and consume it, that's fine, or sell it. Now, number 33, require the housing authority to concern itself with providing housing for the elderly and disabled as a priority. Now, this bears some explanation. We have a situation now where all across the country we have the projects, right? The housing authority is in control of the projects. And every single city in this country that has the projects knows what it is. It is crime infested with violence, infested with all kinds of unproductive behavior. And it's generally full of people who are working age and working able, but they are in the housing authority nonetheless. Now, we do not support this type of dependency, and we can see by looking at the projects in every city across the country that it doesn't do anything to help anyone. Essentially, it acts as a breeding ground, and this cultural dish of petri dish of creating non-productive behavior, unhealthy behavior, and that sort of thing. It actually encourages and entraps people in poverty. Now, we don't support going in and just kicking everyone out, especially in the middle of a depression, but what we support is using the buildings that are actually there, the apartments that exist, for people who are genuinely in need of a place to stay, federally subsidized, people who can't support themselves, like the elderly, the chronically ill, the disabled, that sort of thing. We support refurbishing these apartments for these people. And again, you don't have to go in and start kicking everyone out on day one, but you can simply stop taking in new applications as you convert this over for people who can actually use these apartments. There's no reason why working age and able-bodied people should be living federally subsidized in the housing authority projects while a 90-year-old man who's worked his entire life lives in a shack across the street with no air conditioning or no electricity. This is not how things should be done. So number 34, we want to end general welfare or TANF payments, TANF payments as the economic crisis is drawn to a close. Now, TANF is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. This is what is essentially general welfare. They changed the name. This is a dependency program. Now, we don't want any cuts until the crisis has been averted. It is not fair to go in and cut these types of services and programs and kick people out on the street when there's no jobs for them to find. We do not support that. But once the crisis is averted, once the crisis ends, and I'm referring to the economic crisis, the culture of dependency must be ended as well. And these opportunities, once they become available, should preclude the continuation of these programs. Now, number 35, we want to direct the Department of Education to require schools to end sex education, death education, and all these other failed socialization-based programs, right? And we can see the results of these programs. Our education system is probably the worst in the world. Sex education, death education has done nothing but create a generation of children who are obsessed with sex and death. These other socialization-based programs, it is not the job of the school to socialize your child. It's the job of the school to educate the child in basic skills and so forth, math, etc. Now, we want an immediate refocusing from training on political correctness and social justice warrior, social SJW speak and all that kind of stuff, and confidence building. We want to see a refocusing on achievement and actual education. We're not worried if they know the new PC terms. We want an actual education. We want to focus on problem solving, on logic, on creativity, the basics of math and reading. That should be the main focus. Second language skills. Yes, we do support teaching children second languages in school early on. Schools and teachers, by the way, should be provided with whatever funding they need via the proceeds that would be received from a Wall Street sales tax and credit from a nationalized Fed. Number 36, we want an immediate end to torture. We want to close Guantanamo Bay. We want to close Bagram Air Force Base Detention Center. We want to end the floating prison barges, other CIA torture sites, including the ones that we have domestically, like the Chicago black site that's being used by the Chicago Police Department. These things must be closed immediately. The process of torture must be ended, and anyone who has engaged in it, the perpetrators, from the very top who've ordered it to the very bottom who've actually done it, needs to be prosecuted and thrown in jail. Now, Number 37, we need to lead the charge in banning the use of depleted uranium in warfare. This has no place. This is a battle that lasts for 30 days, could have ramifications that last for 30 billion years in terms of health. We don't support that. These are the types of weapons of war that need to be eliminated. Now, number 38, this is kind of all-encompassing, but we want to repeal freedom-crushing and constitution-shredding legislation and executive orders like the Patriot Act, the Domestic Security Enhancement Act of 2003, that was also called Patriot Act too, Presidential Directive 51, a number of provisions in the National Emergency Act, provisions of the John Warner Defense Authorization Act of 2007, provisions of the Military Commissions Act of 2006, Executive Order 13438, National Security Presidential Directive 59, Homeland Security Presidential Directive 20, Presidential Directive 5, and of course the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act. We want to eliminate these things. Number 39, we want to revamp FEMA so that it's an effective emergency management agency and not a toss-up between a martial law agency or a colossal failure in an actual emergency. So we don't want to eliminate FEMA. It serve a legitimate purpose if it's redirected in the right way. But we don't want a martial law organization, and we don't want this bungling collection of idiocy when it becomes to an actual emergency. Number 40, in constitution-free zones. It's not constitutional. Number 41, a constitutional amendment to expressly provide the right to privacy. Now, I argue that the Fourth Amendment does just that. It provides the right to privacy. But since we cannot get a consensus among those of us who are willing to accept more encroachment upon our personal lives, then why not develop a constitutional amendment that expressly provides the right to privacy? We can do that, and it can be worded appropriately that it expressly provides the right to privacy, so there's no more question. Number 42, we want to ban animal testing. We want to ban entertainment that involves the torture and mistreatment of animals, and I don't give a damn if you think it's funny to watch on TV or if it's been done for 70 years. If it involves the torture and mistreatment of animals, we want to ban it. And of course, in terms of voting, we have number 43 here. We want to end electronic voting and return to the paper ballot. If you're not capable of writing your name on a piece of paper in terms of a vote, then you really shouldn't be voting to begin with. Okay, so there is our list of demands, and there will be more coming in the near future that we will see as we see the opportunity to implement and develop. But that's the gist. 43 points essentially there of our list of demands, and we hope that you try to take those demands and get them out there and use them as the basis and the foundation for a political movement, for a true revolution in this country, and that's what we hope to see. Now, just in the next 10 minutes or so that we have, I do want to address the Syrian situation, because we are hearing now more reports, more calls coming for a no-fly zone in Syria. So we got the situation heating up both on the rhetorical side and the military side. We've got Turkey and the NATO powers attempting to do everything in their power to launch another direct invasion of a sovereign nation, right? We've got U.S. airstrikes in Syria, Turkish shelling of Syrian positions, and the massing of Saudi troops and aircraft inside Turkey. Now, the concept of a no-fly zone is being trotted out as a legitimate solution to the Syrian crisis again. And a no-fly zone, of course, is nothing more than a cover for a direct NATO invasion of Syria, which has been the goal ever since it became clear that the terrorist proxies were just not enough to get the job done. While Syria has been turned into probably the world's most visible conflict zone, the Western powers have failed to turn it into Libya 2.0. And the Russian involvement has effectively prevented them from just bombing Assad into the Stone Age as they did to Gaddafi about 5 years ago. Actually, it was recently the anniversary of that. But the calls for the no-fly zone are coming from Western governments and the GCC and the Western mainstream press, despite the fact that ISIS, of course, has no air force, nor do any of the other terrorist groups and groupuscules that are operating in Syria today. So it's clear that the real enemy here is the legitimate government of Bashar al-Assad. So we had Angela Merkel, the wretched German chancellor, making renewed calls for a no-fly zone in Syria on Tuesday, and she did that again in the German parliament on Wednesday. She preposterously suggested that a no-fly zone could be created as the result of an agreement between the Syrian government, opposition forces, and ISIS. A no-fly zone as a sign of goodwill between the opposition and the Syrian government. That makes no sense. This is what she said. In the current situation, it would be helpful if there was an area there in which none of the warring parties carry out attacks by air. So a type of no-fly zone. That's what Merkel has to say. And of course, we have the typical Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish madman, the president, renewing calls for a no-fly zone as well, even taken to berating the United States for not joining in and implementing the zone immediately in the face of the Russians. No, this is what he has to say. He says, quote, I have long spoken about the need to create a safety zone, and I now see that certain countries which have not supported this idea are now starting to agree with it. I am asking the United States, you do not approve of a no-fly zone, and now there are Russian planes bombing Syria, and thousands of people are dying there. But it seems that we are a coalition and must act together. So what happened? End quote. Well, he's been calling for a no-fly zone since 2011, and this was, funny enough, this statement was made under the guise of protecting civilians. But this guise is fairly transparent because Turkey has been responsible for arming and supporting and facilitating much of these terrorist operations themselves. And remember that Turkey is actually shelling the YPG and shelling the Syrian military positions as well as civilian areas. So we're not going to listen to Erdogan give us lectures about civilian casualties since he's been responsible for so many of them. Now, the United States has been open to the idea in the past, and it no doubt supports the proposition of a no-fly zone. In fact, I think some of the calls came from the no-fly zone, from the United States regarding the no-fly zone in the past. But it's a lot more difficult to implement a no-fly zone when Russia is flying over Syria. Now, Russia has been vocal in in its opposition to the establishment of a no-fly zone. Germany is now apparently prepared to send a proposal to create a no-fly zone to the United Nations and the working groups there in the near future. Now, make no mistake that a no-fly zone is a military invasion. I quote General Carter Ham, we should make no bones about it. It first entails killing a lot of people and destroying the Syrian air defenses and those people who are manning those systems. And then it entails destroying the Syrian Air Force, preferably on the ground, in the air if necessary. This is a violent combat action that results in lots of casualties and increased risk to our own personnel. I quote again General Philip Breedlove. I know it sounds stark, but what I always tell people when they talk to me about a no-fly zone is it's basically to start a war with that country because you are going to have to go in and kinetically take out their air defense capability, end quote. But still we have NATO and Turkey and the United States and the GCC and Israel moving forward with their plan to destroy Assad. Now, the moral question aside, it's pretty clear to the world that the responsible and wisest strategy here on the part of NATO would be to pull back a bit and exercise some restraint, since it's clear by now the Russians are asserting themselves in defense of Syria and their own strategic interests in a way that they didn't do in regards to Libya. But the unipolar world now exists whether NATO desires it or not. It would be wise to work within those parameters. The multipolar world now exists whether NATO desires it or not. And we need to work within those parameters. Or NATO should work within those parameters, at least get their wits about them and not draw us into the Third World War. So a no-fly zone, if you're going to hear about that this week, remember, is only the prelude to direct military conflict in Syria. If that no-fly zone is created, then we have no choice but to wish the Syrian people well and wish that they have the same courage and resolve that's resisted the will of the foreign empire for the last 5 years, and we hope that they continue their resistance. We hope that Providence intercedes on their behalf, and in the meantime, we maintain a staunch opposition to the creation of a no-fly zone in the first place. Now, we've also covered in the past the article and the interaction between former U.S. ambassador and terrorists and death squad supporter Robert Ford and Vanessa Beeley, a Syria researcher. And she apparently was tweeting at Robert Ford several weeks ago. And Ford got into a debate with her on Twitter, and the debate shifted from the public page to the private messaging. And Vanessa published the interaction, where she utterly destroyed Robert Ford in this interaction, in this debate. Ford threw a little tantrum about her publishing his response and engaged her in essentially round two. He wanted to debate her some more. I guess he went back and did his homework after he got dealt with mightily in that debate. And I now have an article on that. If you want to read her debate with Robert Ford via Twitter, go to BrandonTurbeville.com. It also is up at ActivistPost.com. Propagandist Robert Ford goes for round two with Syria researcher Vanessa Beeley and loses. She deals with him swiftly in this interaction as well, and I encourage you to go check it out because it's telling. Robert Ford is really digging a hole for himself here in terms of his terrorist support. We can all see it. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to recap. We went over the list of demands tonight. I want you to go back and listen to this show, write it down, get these demands out there, start working to these toward these goals. We have to make some demands if we want to have some real change and direction, and we have to do so. We have to start now. We have to really start working for these things and working in these directions. It's imperative. The next few years, the next 3 years or so, are going to be extremely important in determining whether or not we decide to go toward a world of true freedom for the world's people, or whether or not we enter essentially into a global version of Nazi Germany or a neo-feudal state. So it's going to be extremely important. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to